if we actually have a look in here, you can see we're using it. It's got a top swatch, a middle swatch, and a bottom swatch, and that really isn't very much control. You can actually vary the swatch positions here using these spinners. You can say that it's white up to frame up to say 10% of the particle age, and then it comes in at mid-grey on 50% of the particle age, and when it reaches 100% of the particle age, it goes to black. But at the end of the day, it's not really much control. You can map each one of these, which is a cool feature in itself, I suppose. But what I found is very, very useful is to actually get the particle age map and place it into the map slot of a gradient ramp. And if you go to the gradient type of a gradient ramp, you can see you've got mapped here. And it's then using this particle age as a mask to work out which part of this gradient ramp to use. Now, the white part will actually show up here, and the black part will show up here. So basically it'll fade through these colors using this as a gradient. It'll start off on white, by 50% it'll fade to mid-gray, and then it'll go to black. And that corresponds to here, here, and here. Now, these particles don't have mapping, so when you use this technique, make sure that you go up to mapping and change it from explicit map channel, which as I said isn't there, to planar from object XYZ. Now, it actually turns out this effect doesn't need any mapping. What you want is for each particle to be just a flat color, to be flat white, flat yellow, flat orange, flat red, whatever. You're not really interested in having any sort of detail going around the particle, because at the end of the day, it's just meant to be a tiny little spark. So basically you want to get it so that you turn off mapping, or the need for mapping, and we're doing that but just by using planar object XYZ. So that's the red spray rocket. If we go to the silver spray rocket to have a look at the gradient there, you can see it's basically a grey kind of gradient. I've used the same technique again. It's used a lot in this DVD. You'll see it used in many different effects, basically because it's just very useful, for producing any sort of flame or spark effects. In this case, I think I've tweaked the color slightly, so it's got a slight yellow tinge to it, just to make it a bit more interesting. But you can literally put in as many slots here and adjust the color any way you want, and that's actually used in one of the other effects to produce a kind of sparkling effect, which is something I'll show you in a second. So again, you got self-illumination, so it starts off self-illuminated using the bright white color and then fades off all the way to black. So particles will basically fade out to black. You've got the same there, red spray rocket. Now for silver spray bloom, we've actually got something of a special effect going on here. What I've done in this case is I've actually combined self-illumination using color. You can see I've actually knocked it down so it's only having 70% of the normal effect it would normally have. If you look at the color I'm using this gradient ramp again, and I'm using particle age, same system, but you can see I'm using a lot of different gradient entries, and that's basically so that as the particle changes its age, it starts off at white, then flickers out to black, comes back in at white, flickers out to black, comes in at white, flickers out, sorry, goes out to black, goes into white, blah 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 as it goes along. And that basically produces a kind of sparkling effect. Now, if you wanted to produce rainbow effects, you would just have to change these white entries into different colors, like yellow here, red here, indigo, cyan, and so forth. And then as the particle ages, it would actually change through all these different color values here. So you could produce a really sort of crazy psychedelic kind of firework effect. So that's been used to control the self-illumination up to 70%, as you can see here. And then on top of that, you've got some color being used. So you can see in this case we're using this again, this sort of champagne colored gradient, and that then gives the particles some sort of color to them. So they're mostly white, but this, as I said, gives them a slight yellowy tinge. And it's basically, that's allowed to come in because I've used less than 100% of self-illumination here. If we go to red bloom, you can see you've got the same thing going on, except this time it starts, each red particle starts off white, very quickly decays down to red and then fades off towards blackness. And again, you've got this sparkle effect going on. So basically our red blooms have this sparkling red particles going on in them. Then we have the blue bloom, which in the end, when it rendered, didn't come out looking particularly blue. So you'll have to forgive the slightly misleading name. But again, we've got, blue gradient, and we've got the sparkling effect here again. And then we've got the same thing again, and this is for one of the actual blooms, which has multiple colors in. This was just